What is classical liberalism and why is it important to you? And did you know that classical liberalism has changed everything in terms of Western civilization? So stay tuned.
Big topics, big ideas, and practical policy solutions. This is Leaders on the Frontier with your host, David Leese.
Hi there, it's December 20th, 2022, and welcome. My name is David Leese, and I'm your host today for Leaders on the Frontier. Our topic today is classical liberalism. Wow, what a word. So what does that mean, and what is its significance to us? If I told you that classical liberalism is one of the most important social and political frameworks and philosophies in all of history, would you believe me? Well, we're going to explore that. It's a fascinating topic. I'm so excited to understand that and what classical liberalism is. And I would say often we take it, quite frankly, for granted. So today, I'm delighted to have with us today, I would say, the foremost expert or voice around what classical liberalism is today and how it is so significant and important for us today. And that is the world-renowned thinker, Dr. Eamon Butler. And he is the director of the Adam Smith Institute from the UK. It's a leading policy think tank. He has degrees in both economics and psychology, and he's an award-winning author. And one of the books that he wrote just a few years ago is really a gem of a book. I quite think it's the best summation of classical liberalism I've ever seen. It's called Classical Liberalism, a Primer, an introduction. So welcome, Dr. Butler.
You're welcome. Yes, thank you very much indeed.
Well, it's wonderful to see you. I am so thrilled that you could join us. I know that you're in Scotland right now, but it is amazing that you're able to join us, and it's really an honor to see you.
Not at all. I'm very pleased to be on.
So can you just tell us briefly what is at the heart of classical liberalism? Is it a political party? What is it?
I wish I could sum it up very simply, but I don't know that I can. It's not a political party. It's if you like, an attitude of mind. It's the idea that human beings are born free and they should be free. And if you want to make them unfree, you've got to have a pretty good reason to do it. And it's about being tolerant of other people. It's about spontaneity. It's about markets. It's about property and trade and exchange. It's about civil society and associations and churches and all sorts of other groups like that. It's about the free world, really.
So it's really, is it an ideology then? You said it's almost like a state of mind. That's interesting.
Yes, I wouldn't regard it as an ideology because it doesn't have specific ends, if you like. I mean, if you talk about Marxism or something like that, well, that has a specific sort of outcome that you're supposed to be aiming to. But the thing about classical liberalism, you're just saying, let people be free. And we don't know what sort of a society that's going to produce. We think it's going to produce a very good society, but we don't know where that society is going to go. We don't know what it's going to make. We don't know what its economy is going to look like. But we trust in people's freedom. And when people are free, they can make decisions for themselves. And that is probably better than having bureaucrats making them. So there's no specific agenda, if you like. It's really the only agenda is let's get bureaucrats and government out of the way so that we can lead our own lives.
Wow, so this is actually, it's hard to believe, something we take for granted, but it's actually a revolutionary concept, isn't it?
Yes, we do take it for granted, especially in the West, because we've grown up with the institutions of a liberal order, with the rule of law and with a system of justice and all of those sorts of things, and democracy to some extent. And those things don't always exist in other places, and they're very difficult to recreate. I mean, we've been through civil wars and hundreds of years of history in order to build up these institutions. They're not something that you can just simply say, well, here's a formula, we can plant it on Afghanistan or or Nepal or anywhere else, and then it'll be a perfectly wonderful, liberal, free society. It's something you have to work at.
So, speaking of work, I'm a student of history as well, and I reflect on, frankly, the incredible history over really thousands of years, how humankind has always interpreted freedom in different ways. But classical liberalism, there's some really important historical landmarks, would you say? Um, what are those kinds of landmarks, would you say, in summary? I know it's quite complicated, but are there key historical highlights that we should be aware of?
Well, liberalism, classical liberalism, has roots in Far Eastern thought, in Indian thought, but I think probably you can trace it back to the Anglo-Saxon era before 1066 in the what is now the UK, but in England, where it was a very free society. Individuals were very much in charge of their own destiny. And there were kings, but they were actually elected. A group of wise people called the Witan would elect the king, and the king's power was limited by that. So that's a sort of restraint on authority is an important tradition in classical liberalism. And then, of course, you see it revived again after the Norman invasion. It was revived again in 1215 with Magna Carta, which laid down the rights of individuals against the authority. So this idea of taming authority is extremely important. And I suppose you could look at the Revolutionary Wars in America, and the belief there was that the British government had violated its trust with the colonials, and that they thought they had a perfect right to rebel because the British government was not actually respecting the values of the Magna Carta. They weren't respecting people's individual liberty.
Okay, so it's fascinating. The under your leadership, Eamon, you produced a very interesting documentary, a film, and it's about the Magna Carta. I would definitely recommend it to our viewers. And it was narrated by certainly one of my favorite actors, Hugh Bonneville, of all things. And it's a fascinating story how King John was such a bad king that a whole group of leaders across England essentially forced him to say, look, we're going to rebel unless you sign this document that guarantees some rights and freedoms. And I was fascinated by the emphasis that the king or the queen is under the rule of law. That's a revolutionary concept, isn't it?
Yes, I think it was at the time, and it took us a long time to establish that. I mean, even Charles I in the 17th century believed in the divine right of kings, that he had a divine right given to him by God to rule just as he wished. And we had a very bloody civil war, which settled that issue. And the settlement was that no, the king and the king's authority is subject to Parliament, that you have to have the agreement of the people to do that. So it was a very long and bloody history, really, and many thousands of lives have been lost in order to secure that liberty and that subjection of authority to the rule of law, that people in positions of power are subject to just the same laws and principles that the rest of us are, and there's no special treatment for them.
So that tradition, then, we often refer to it as kind of the Anglo-Saxon tradition of understanding freedom or liberty. Is that different than other parts of the world or continental Europe, or like France, for instance?
Yes. The ideas of liberalism grew up in different ways in different places, and French liberalism or continental liberalism is really quite different from what we have in England. We had an interesting legal difference, if you like, that our law in England allows you to do absolutely anything you like, until it causes some trouble, and then we have you get taken to court and told you can't do it anymore. Whereas on the continent, with its sort of Roman Napoleonic War law, that the idea is that you can only do something if somebody in authority gives you permission to do it, and they're really quite different points of view. And so liberalism, as it grew up in the continent, is really quite different from English and indeed North American liberalism.
So their assumption, for instance, in Roman or Napoleonic law is that, well, there's many differences, but the rights come from the state. Is that a fair comment?
Yes, absolutely right. And you don't have freedom to do what you like. You have to get permission to do what you like. And this is why the European Union has so many rules and regulations, hundreds and thousands of pages of them, which really does irritate us here in the UK. Because we guide people's actions by principle. We say, basically, don't harm people. Whereas in the continent, you have to have precise rules as to what you can do and what you must do and what you mustn't do.
Exactly. Now, you wrote in 2015, again, this wonderful book, Classical Liberalism, a Primer. Why did you write it?
Well, I thought that it was important that people who might not be academics, who might be, I don't know, business people or students or kids at school, really, or just lay people who are interested in different social and political ideas. I thought it was important that people like that should have access to something that really just outlined the subject in very simple terms, with very short words and very short sentences and very short paragraphs, and without all of the academic paraphernalia of glossaries and footnotes and references and all of that kind of stuff.
Well, it's a brilliant book. I just recommend it so much, and you can find it through the Adam Smith Institute website. So I want to welcome all our viewers again today, and I'm with Dr. Eamon Butler, a world authority on classical liberalism. And speaking of classical liberalism, I do want to go through the top 10 principles within the primer, so we kind of walk through that quickly. It's a little bit of an ambitious topic because in the second half, we want to talk a little bit more about contemporary issues. But I did want to talk about the first principle, which is the presumption of freedom. What do you mean by that?
The presumption of freedom is simply that you start all of your thinking from the idea that people are free. We're born free. And that if somebody wants to stop you doing something, they've got the burden of proof is on them, that we're free individuals. There's no reason why we should be subject to anybody else's authority. We can lead our own lives. If you think, well, I have to stop you doing this or that, then you have to produce reasons why you should stop me doing this or that. And so that's really the presumption of freedom.
So that's, again, a very powerful concept today, because if you look at different analyses, it's very tragic, but at least half, if not more than the world, are either serfs, like they're working endlessly for someone else without any rights, or they're slaves, basically, right? So this presumption of freedom is a big deal, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and it's something which, again, does not necessarily come naturally to people. I think that people are used to being oppressed by authorities, and they have been throughout human history, frankly. And big bullies throw their weight around, and the only difference is that instead of being self-appointed bullies, they're politically appointed bullies these days. Exactly. So they throw their weight around, and we sort of get used to that. And so the idea that no, we should be free individuals is in some places quite a sensational one. And as you say, in half the world, that people don't understand that at all.
Yeah, it's really shocking. So that's the first one, the presumption of freedom. The second principle is the primacy of the individual. What do you mean by that?
Well, individuals are very diverse, and I think we need to respect that diversity. The primacy of the individual is that you think of society as being, if you like, a collection of individuals. It isn't that there's something which is called society that's got a life of its own. That leads you into collectivism, and you think, right, well, society says this and society says that. No, it doesn't. Society is a collection of individuals, and your thinking needs to be centered around individuals. When you're trying to decide laws, you're trying to decide the principles by which you lead your life. Start with individuals. Don't start with the group. That's not the right place.
Okay, so this is a fascinating issue here, because hidden in the background of a lot of political policy debate is the assumption that somehow that isn't the case, that somehow there are specially anointed people that somehow know the will of the people. I think of tragic, frankly, evil examples like Stalin, Mao, and Hitler, who thought that they knew that there was the will of this bigger group, like the public will. And we can go through that in detail, but that's a very significant point then, isn't it, Eamon?
Oh, yes. And it goes back to Rousseau, the French philosopher Rousseau, who thought that we should all live according to the public will. And you think, well, what is the public will?
Yeah, exactly.
How do you know what the public will is?
Right.
You've got a lot of different people who've got very different ideas as to how we should live. So there's no such thing as the public will. So what we're trying to do in classical liberalism is to, if you like, reconcile the different views of millions and millions and millions of very diverse individuals. We don't assume that everybody has got the same opinion and that that's the one that should prevail.
Exactly. So well said. So the third principle, speaking of these utopian impulses, is minimizing coercion. Imagine that. So what does that mean?
Well, again, the burden of proof has to be on somebody that wants to force you to do something. I mean, coercion, the use of force is an evil. So what we want to do is to reduce that to as much as possible. Now, of course, it may be that you have to have some degree of force in order to, I don't know, punish people who are criminals, prevent people, if you like, from violating the rights of other people to get along with their lives. So, you do have criminals, you do have murderers and worse, and you may need force against them. But that is something which should be minimized, that we should work out a way of delivering that force in a rational way. Otherwise, if we just allow anybody to take revenge against other people that have crossed them, then you will end up with widespread violence. So the use of force has got to be something which is carefully directed, and it's directed rationally for good reason. It's not that you can simply throw your weight around and bully other people into living the way that you think they should live.
Okay, so minimizing coercion is the third principle, and that sounds very good. Fourthly, the principle of toleration. So does that mean if I'm offended by your speech that I should somehow not tolerate you, Eamon?
Well, toleration is all about recognizing that people are very diverse. They have diverse views, and many of those views are held for very, very good, strong reasons. It might be religious views, or it might be political views. It might be views about society, just about the way we live, about manners, and so on. So there's a huge variety of people, and we need to rub along with everybody else. So rather than say, no, you can't have that view, you must not practice that religion, you must not think in this particular way, rather than doing that, you try to tolerate other people, and you get along with them. And actually the free society is very good at doing that. You just let people be themselves, rather than try to stop them and make them into something which they're not.
Wow, that just makes so much sense. So that's kind of like a natural then for freedom of speech. That's why that's important.
Yes, yeah, that absolutely, that gets you into free speech. And I mean, there are limits on free speech. I mean, John Stuart Mill, the great English philosopher of the 19th century, said you can't just stand up and shout fire in a crowded theatre, because there would be injuries as people scramble for the door. So, but as long as you're doing things that don't injure other people physically, then you should be able to get on with your life. And so if I have views that you find offensive, well, these are my views, and you should tolerate them. And similarly, I should tolerate your views. I might argue against them, and I might say you're an idiot, and here's 3 reasons why you're wrong. But you need to allow people the ability to express themselves, because that's really the only way you learn. You only learn by people putting forward different points of view, and then you have to think, see, so there's a little bit of grain of truth in that. I think that, I've learned something from that. So that's how you make progress.
I would think that that's the only way that you can actually innovate, isn't it? In terms of knowledge, is to have freedom of speech.
Oh, definitely, because innovation comes from sparking off other people. That's how you make most progress. It comes through discussion, and very few things come from one single mind. They come from lots of minds collaborating together.
Right. So censorship is bad. So the 5th principle is limited and representative government. So what do we mean by that?
Well, representative government is simply where you elect people to make decisions on your behalf. We can't all get together every day and decide every bit of every law. It's impractical, for one thing, and secondly, we don't necessarily know the details about different subjects that we want to have laws about. So what you do is you elect people that can spare more time to do that. And those are your representatives, your senators, your members of Congress, and your members of Parliament, and so on. And in terms of limited representative government, you have to recognize that, well, democracy is great at deciding a few things, but only a few things. There are very few things that we have to decide collectively. Most things we can decide ourselves. So make sure that you limit the use of democracy, the use of the political process, to where it really has to happen.
Okay, that makes sense. The 6th principle, the rule of law. Is that what John Adams meant, the American revolutionary, that we are a nation of laws, not of men?
Yes, that's right. The idea here is that you shouldn't be subject to the arbitrary decisions, the arbitrary whim of any ruler or groups of rulers. That there should be clear principles of law, and that everybody should be subject to them. So if you are a legislator and you pass a law, it should apply to you as much as to anybody else. And that means that people can't be victimized by majorities that happen to be in power.
Okay, so does rule of law also include, obviously good process, right? Like you want to be based on evidence and, tried before a jury and, all the rest. But does that also mean that judges, in terms of this framework, also need to kind of really follow carefully the common law or historical precedent, not just kind of their whims or ideological preferences around equity or something like that? Is that right?
Yes, you're right. To some extent, judges, if you like, they don't really make law, but they crystallize law. I think, the Anglo-Austrian thinker Friedrich Hayek, said that we have an idea as to what is justice. It's in our hearts somewhere. We know when something is just and when something is unjust. And what judges do is to try to crystallize that and put it into words, so that we know what we can do and what we can't do, what is just and what is unjust. So that's really the law, the rule for a judge. But otherwise, they're subject to the same rules as everybody else.
Okay. The 7th principle, spontaneous order. What is that?
Well, again, this goes back to F.A. Hayek, the 20th century Anglo-Austrian thinker. And he observed that if you look at animal societies, the society of bees or any other creature, they're social creatures, but they seem to collaborate without there isn't a single, in the case of a beehive, for example, there isn't a sort of single bee that gives the orders to everybody else. They just know what to do, and they get along and do it. And he says that human society is very much the same. If you take things like language, for example, that's not something which was invented by anybody or imposed by anybody. It's just grown up naturally, and it changes and it evolves. And that's the way he thinks that society works. And that's how a free society works, that it evolves. It works out ways to deal with the current circumstances. And when circumstances change, societies change. It doesn't need to have people giving the orders to do it. Indeed, quite the contrary. When people do, you have central planners in the Soviet Union or China and so on, and they decide, oh no, we're going to decide everything rationally and plan everything rationally. It always ends up as a complete nightmare.
So that's a brilliant example, though. So let's take grammar. You said language. It's not like that came out of a government program, right?
Yes, absolutely. It's quite natural and spontaneous.
Yeah.
And you know, the rules of grammar are interesting because we sort of know when something is grammatical and when something isn't. But can you write down those rules? There's very few people, I think, could write down exactly what the rules of grammar are. We know them. They're somehow in our minds, in our constitution, and we follow them without realizing that we're following them. And Hayek says society is exactly like that. There are rules, courtesies, manners, things that you know you are right and things that you know are wrong, and you follow those things without even really thinking about it, without even knowing. And yet,
so customs and manners matter, Eamon?
Yes, absolutely.
Why?
Yes, they certainly do. Especially in places like Britain or in China, in Japan. Island countries are very conscious of manners, and it allows people, manners and beyond manners, just the respect for law and respect for individuals. These things allow us to cooperate with each other. They allow us to collaborate. They build up trust between us, and that's extremely important to us.
But and it's not. You don't mean that in some kind of superficial manner. This is profound because the alternative, right, Eamon, is ultimately social breakdown and potentially violence, right?
Yes, it's mounting distrust. I mean. Sometimes when you go to foreign cultures, you don't really understand their culture and they don't really understand you, and you don't really trust them as much as you would do somebody from your own culture. And it takes time and effort to overcome that. Once you've been living in a place for a few months, then you start to learn it, but it's quite difficult to do. So if you can actually build that up and build up that trust and easy correspondence between people, then you can make progress very much quicker.
Okay, and then I can also do many things with you in terms of cooperation. Like I can, in a high trust, high functioning society, I can have really good business with you on a handshake, potentially. I've been in that kind of environment, right? You do big deals on a handshake. It's that
absolutely
much
and that's extremely important. So instead of having to have pages and pages and pages of documentation, if you both know roughly what you're about, then that's it. You shake hands and it gets done. It's very much more efficient than having scores of lawyers writing down very complicated contracts.
No, it's absolutely brilliant. So that naturally leads us to the eighth principle, which is property, trade, and markets.
Yes, it does lead on. It does lead on very naturally because it's interesting that people like Vernon Smith, the American economist, have done experiments and found that in places around the world where property and markets are most established, there is more trust between people. And I don't know which comes first. I think probably the trust comes first and then the markets. But if you're dealing with people and you're exchanging things with them, and you produce things and they produce things, and then they exchange theirs with you, and you feel you're better off because you've got something that you can't make, but they can make, that sort of thing. That makes people, I think, engage with each other, and therefore over time trust each other much more. So property is very important, and the respect for property is very important, because then you can produce things and you can exchange them because it's your property. So that brings you into trade, it brings you into markets, and these things are incredibly productive in terms of we can have what Adam Smith called the division of labor. We can specialize and concentrate on what we do best, and then we can exchange. We don't all have to try and do everything. We can specialize, and then we can get specialist machinery and equipment in, and produce things even more efficiently. So market economies grow very much quicker than any other, and that's pretty obvious from the way the world is.
Okay, so but that would explain why this kind of understanding of how a high functioning society can work, that kind of agreement, has huge benefits for all of us. Like that explains really, in this modern world, the change of our living standard the last 250 years. You can't even compare it with 500 years ago, can you?
No, that's right. Yes, I mean, since about, I don't know, 1780s, something like that, the world has got fabulously rich by 18th century standards. We live like princes did in the 18th and 17th century, and indeed better, things that they couldn't even imagine and conceive. And it's not just because our technology is getting better, it's because we have this market economy that we can specialize, and because we specialize, we produce things very much more efficiently. Adam Smith took the example in The Wealth of Nations of a pin factory, and he says there are 18 people in the pin factory, and they all do different things. One draws out the wire, one puts the point on it, one puts the head on it, and then another one packs it up, and things like that. And by specializing like that, they can produce between them tens of thousands of pins every day. Now, if you or I had to make a pin from a piece of steel, it would take us several weeks, I think, to produce one pin.
Yeah, right. So a lot of this is kind of common sense, wouldn't you say, Eamon, in the sense that it's not like Adam Smith dreamt this all up and then people instituted this way of acting. This is an organic kind of result of how society developed and got along, and respecting that is basically what you're about, isn't it?
Yeah, yes, I think that's right. I mean, if you look at children in the school playground, they swap things. Okay, one's got a toy that the others that they're fed up with, and another would like that toy but has got something else, some, I don't know, sticker cards or whatever, that they're willing to exchange. So they exchange things, and it's perfectly natural. It's Adam Smith himself said that this is a perfectly natural part of the human mind, to exchange things, and it makes you better off if you get something that somebody else has got, which you need or you want. Then you've gained in value, and the person that's exchanged with you has gained in value. So both sides are better off. And this is the point of the market, that through market exchange, both sides are better off. That was an insight by Adam Smith. That was original thinking, because people used to think, it's only the person that ends up with the money that's better off.
Exactly.
No, both sides are better off.
So Karl Marx kind of screwed it up there, didn't he?
Like so many other
that
things.
Actually gets us naturally to principle number 9, which is voluntary associations, or in other words, civil society, like church or groups. They're pretty critical, aren't they?
Yes. I mean, again, this is a very natural part of humanity, that we are social creatures, and we get along with other people, and we have affinities, with them. So we have different people have different likes and dislikes, and some would go out and play golf with other people, and some would play bridge, and others would throw themselves into community work or mountain rescue or 101 other things. And as you say, churches and philanthropic organizations and community groups, all of these things. These things are very important to us, and you can see how resilient they are. I mean, when the Soviet Union tried to basically suppress religion, well, when the Soviet Union fell to bits, religion came back in quite a big way. It had never really left people, that they felt themselves as being part of a church. So these things are very important to us. And they're also important as, if you like, a buffer against government, a buffer against authority, that we can do things our own way, and we actually do them. If we do things locally, we do them actually more efficiently as far as the local people are concerned than any bureaucrat 1,000 miles away can possibly imagine.
Yeah, and it's frankly hard to imagine society without those associations where people in their freedom and innovative and ingenious ways serve each other better and help each other. It's really quite impressive, isn't it?
It is, and why would you want it? Why would you want it any other way? I mean, if people get along and do constructive things together, great.
Exactly. So that kind of leads us naturally to the 10th principle of all things, and that is common values. What do you mean by that?
Well, I have to confess, to some extent, I was just trying to get the list up to 10.
Okay.
But it does seem to me that there is a sort of common humanity, and if we respect our common humanity, we can make quite a lot of progress. That rather than assume that it's us and them, that rather than assume that we're right and therefore anybody else with any different view must be wrong and therefore must be persecuted because they're evil and wicked and they're damaging to society. So I think we need to recognize that we're all individuals, but we're all human, and we need to collaborate and cooperate together. And it's not a case of us and them. There's too much us and them in politics at the moment.
Very well said. So again, welcome to everybody who's joining this discussion with Dr. Eamon Butler, a primer on classical liberalism. We just finished off the 10 principles, and I think you did a terrific summation, Eamon, of those principles. And I guess what strikes me as we think about those 10 principles is that they truly are a profound gift, if you will, in society. They have a lot of goodwill kind of incorporated into them. And there are massive benefits that we realize, and as we've alluded to before, really take for granted in our society, including our standard of living. I mean, you just compare our standard of living compared to so many other societies, it's a huge contrast. But why is it that we tend to take these understandings of society in the form of classical liberalism for granted? Is there an easy answer to that, Eamon?
I think, and they have been there in the case of Canada, America, Britain, Europe to some extent. They've been there for a long, long, long time, and we get used to it. There's the story of the little fish and the big fish. And the little fish says to the big fish, "Oh, isn't the water lovely?" And the big fish says, "What's water?" Because the big fish has got used to water. It doesn't even think about water anymore. And similarly, we don't even think about having courts that are independent, or we don't even think about having elections. We routinely have elections, whereas in many other countries, these things are unusual. You expect the courts to be corrupt. You expect officials to be corrupt. You expect politicians to be corrupt. And you expect them to throw their weight around and not be governed by their own laws. So we in the West have got used to that. Used to the institutions of a free society, And that's actually one of the biggest dangers, because as you were saying with free speech, we've got used to it, and if you try to limit it, then you will find yourself in a real problem. If you just take it for granted, say, oh well, we can dispense with that, then you do end up in real social problems.
Mm-hmm. The other thing that struck me about these principles and your primer that so brilliantly explains about classical liberalism is the nuance in that. And I would say the civility, and it seems like such a sensible way to build a high functioning society. And yet, and I did want to notice this, is that there's such an absurd caricature of people who sometimes try to portray classical liberals as heartless, cold, unfeeling people. And I mean, you, as a case in point, are just the opposite of that, given your care by which you think about this. But isn't that fascinating? Do you notice that how so many on the other side try to characterize Adam Smith and company as just the cold marketplace, when in fact it's much more than that. It's just the opposite, really, isn't it?
Well, Adam Smith is a case in point that he believed in free markets and a free economy for the same reason that I do, which is that this is the best way of helping working poor people.
Exactly.
In Smith's case, the working poor man, but anybody in these days, and it's very important to do that. I think that's part of our humanity. Is we're concerned for other people. Now, people who don't believe in classical liberalism, who are on the other side, would say, well, the way to help poor people is to take money from rich people and give it to them. Whereas the classical liberal would say, no, the best way to help the working poor is to get out of their way. Get rid of all of these rules and regulations that make their life impossible. Get rid of all these taxes, or as many taxes as we can, that oppress them much more than wealthier people. So that sort of that care for other people is very central to classical liberalism. Classical liberalism is not about individuals just doing what they want any way they want to do it. It is about cooperation and collaboration between people, and it's really the biggest and most advanced way in which we do collaborate and we do cooperate. The market, the capitalist market system, is the biggest collaborative, cooperative system that you could ever imagine.
Exactly. No, it's incredibly brilliant, and I love the way you describe that in terms of that collective, cooperative, collaborative way that society works together. It's brilliant. I did want to shift now to. There's so much to talk about because we've just overviewed these 10 profound principles of classical liberalism, juxtaposed to the environment today where we have so much to talk about, so many different challenges. And, I want to do so gingerly with the sense that we talk about them with realism, but also a sense of vision and dare I say, even some measure of optimism. But I guess part of the thing that is really quite amazing is when I look at our current context. And do societies do you sense there seems to be a lot of comments about that we're in a big decline in the West. Do you see that as well? Like when we talk about the UK, I think The Economist just this week came out with an article saying about the UK now being in a profound state of decline. Is that true? How do you see it?
I think it is true for the moment. I'm an optimist, and I think that things change. And I think we were in a worse state in the 1970s, and then Mrs. Thatcher came along. So,
sorry, can you repeat that? You would say that you're in a worse state than pre-Margaret Thatcher?
No, I think we were in a worse state then, but
Oh,
we
I
got
see.
out of it. So I think you can get out of these things. But you do need to understand your principles, and I think this is part of the problem. As I say, I think we've got used to the principles of a free society so much that we take it for granted, and we think that, well, we can do anything with it. We can change it any way we like. And that's not true. And people who've tried to, if you like, create better societies with central planning, Soviet Union, China, many others, and others which are less rigid than that, but nevertheless, try to recreate a new society. They've all been complete failures. So we need to, in the West, to be true to our principles. We need to understand our principles. We, as you say, things like free speech, we need to understand the importance of free speech and to stand up for that and say, no, we're not going to be silenced. We're not going to be cancelled. It's very important that people should hear these arguments, whether they're right or wrong.
Exactly.
I think we've sort of lost a bit of that.
So we're being challenged in a way to relearn these principles and to articulate them and stand up for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another problem, and I always say there's a great trepidation, but I think democracy has become a problem. I'm in favor of democracy, but I think that democracy is a way to decide a few things that you can't decide in any other way. It's a way to make collective decisions. And if you have to make a collective decision, it's a good way to make it because everybody is involved. But do we need to have a collective decision about how large a fizzy drinks can I can buy, or what I can smoke outside on the street, or what I can eat, what I can drink, and when I can do that? Do I need to have a collective decision about all these things? Many of them are supposedly done for my own good. Well, I think I'm the best judge of my own good. I don't see why everybody else should stick their oar in, quite frankly.
Exactly. Yeah. Treat us as adults, for heaven's sake. Is that a
I
key
think that,
principle?
I think that's right, and I think that the problem is that, right, democracy is a great way of deciding some things, but I think we've become so confident about it that we think, oh, democracy can decide anything, and so
Okay.
we end up applying it to more and more things that really it is not suited to do. It's not what it's there for, and then you get people objecting to that and saying, well, this democratic process doesn't work. I'm going to vote for these extreme left or right wing parties. They know what they're about, and this democratic system doesn't work.
So it's amazing, Eamon, in your work, you have known some of the greats in terms of thinkers of classical liberalism. I think of Friedrich Hayek.
Mm-hmm.
We think of the Friedmans.
Mm-hmm.
It's really quite astounding. And when I look at the state of so many Western countries and the size of the government or the state, when we look at expenditures, regulations, the reach of the state is profoundly in every aspect of our lives. It's not just in the size of fizzy pop cans, but it's in the use of every aspect of private property. It's almost disturbing. You have the environmental social governance movement and all our investments there. It's like the hordes of socialism are trying to take over every aspect of our lives. So what would Hayek and the Friedmans be saying today? Or what would you say?
Well, Hayek would be very straightforward. He would say that we have to remain true to our principles and true to the ideas, and that never mind what the politicians are doing, politicians come and go, that what really drives society in the long term is ideas, and therefore he would be urging us to be true to those ideas and to consolidate those ideas and to bring them up to date for the current situation. And that's exactly what he did after the Second World War, when everybody imagined that liberalism, classical liberalism in Europe was long dead. You'd had the Nazis and you'd have the Soviet Union taking over Eastern Europe. Things looked extremely bleak. And so he set up a group of people called the Mont Pelerin Society, academics, who met together more or less every year to think through these ideas and come up with new ideas and new ways of thinking. And they inspired other people, and they inspired people like me and other colleagues in think tanks around the world to actually take these principles and to create some political initiatives with them. So that's certainly what Hayek would be saying. As for Friedman, he was always cheerful, so he would laugh it off and say, yes, it can only get better.
So let's take that to heart with a sense of humor, but also realism, that we really do need to renew those principles in our current context. So speaking of our current context, I want to talk to you a little bit about modern monetary theory. And for fear of being criticized by economists out there, but the essence of modern monetary theory really does enable the state to, in many measures, spend unlimited amounts of money in the form of deficits and debt. Is that fairy tale thinking? I'm obviously not a fan of modern monetary theory, but when are there natural limits to this that will finally stop this kind of insanity, this monstrosity of bigger and bigger spending in a bigger state?
Yes, it's interesting that modern monetary theory has the same initials as magic money tree.
Yes.
And I'm afraid that this theory has already been tested to destruction, because that's exactly the way that people thought during the COVID pandemic. And, let's just throw money at it. It doesn't matter. Future generations are going to be richer than we are, so we'll pass the burden on to them, and they'll pick it up with much less trouble than we do. And we discover it doesn't work. You end up in a real stew because money doesn't grow on trees, and you have to balance the books at the end of the day. So you can't go on borrowing forever. And if you do try to keep borrowing, and governments continue to have deficits, that leads you into inflation, which we're suffering now. And that, again, leads you into a lot of social dislocation, because you get strikes over pay, and then you get different groups vying with each other to get higher wage settlements and so on. And people don't know where to invest because prices are all over the place. And some people have made investments and then they discover they can't afford them because prices are going up so much. So you get into this spiral of dislocation and decline. So it's much better to balance your books if you can. I don't know that there's any solution to this. I mean, many governments have tried to say, right, well, we'll balance our books over the economic cycle of 7 years or something. And then when a crisis strikes, all of that goes out of the window, and they say, well, this is an emergency and we need to borrow a lot more. So I think the problem is allowing governments to borrow at all, actually. I think you should probably not. In fact, in the 18th century in America, they had, and indeed in Britain as well, in the 19th century, we had big debates about whether governments should be able to borrow. And you can't really trust them when they start borrowing.
No. Well, and this is just it. We need debate about these issues, because they're not just economic issues narrowly defined, they're really moral issues. The whole idea that we're going to essentially mortgage the future of the next generation is really quite outrageous, is it not?
Yes, and again, this has been tested to destruction. I mean, my children who are in their 30s keep on complaining that, oh, well, it's all right for your generation. You voted yourselves all of these benefits and free healthcare and free education and welfare benefits and unemployment benefit and all the other things. And, and older people get free bus passes and a great pension and so on and so on. And the younger generation, we can't even afford a house. We can't even afford anywhere to live. So again, that idea, you see, has been tested to destruction. We've already ruined the next generation. They're not going to be richer than we are. They're not going to be able to pay off our debts more easily than we can.
And you would say, in summary, that's really due in large part because of bad government policy, right?
Yes, it is. It's because it's again it's a sort of democratic problem, which is that
Mm,
it's very easy for governments to expand, to throw money around and say, right, we're going to keep taxes down and we're going to spend more money. And okay, if we have to borrow, that's fine. Don't worry about it. We can do that. And then, of course, what you find is that you're in an economically unsustainable position. And it's also immoral because you're trying to pass your own expenditure onto the next generation, who are not even there, not even born yet to complain. They certainly don't get a vote on it,
mhm. Right.
and they don't even get a say on it. So
Mhm,
we vote ourselves all of these benefits. It's a Ponzi scheme. That's the
mhm.
problem.
It really
That
is.
you're hoping that some bigger mug will come along in the next generation and carry on paying for your benefits, so that the generation after will hopefully pay for theirs. It's just,
Okay.
it doesn't work at all.
But that's a very powerful illustration, Eamon, in the sense that it's important that we are educated about these issues and that we do speak up.
Hmm.
And it does mean that we do need to be very conscious about how we teach these principles in education. Many of us are very concerned at Frontier about, how do we say, the woke or hyper politically correct, dare I say, repackaged Marxism in universities that's so popular these days, is really not teaching this classical liberalism. If anything, it's more of an attitude or culture of entitlement. And so that's very important, because culture is really upstream to policy. Culture forms or shapes the kind of policy you have. So today we talk too much about, what are their names again, Prince Harry and
Hmm.
Meghan Markle, rather than talking about, or I guess I didn't use her proper title, but we, instead of talking about them, we should be talking about how do we frankly improve our society.
Yes. Well, I do find the royals endlessly entertaining, I have to say, as I think does most of the British nation. But yes, I mean, those of us who are seriously concerned about society and the future of society, and I always have been, up and down. It doesn't matter whether we're doing well or doing badly. I've always been concerned about that, and that you do actually have to have in your mind a set of principles by which you should live. And I think that's true of individuals as much as societies, quite frankly. So we need to be clear about classical liberal principles, and we need to be braver, I think, probably in stating them. And you mentioned all the woke culture and all the rest of it. Fine, I've got very little complaint about much of it. But when people start limiting my free speech, I think, well, that is against the principles. You won't make progress, intellectual progress, social progress, economic progress, unless people are free to come up with ideas that might be a quarter baked or completely wrong, but nevertheless, if they can come up with ideas, we might actually learn something from them. And even if their ideas are completely wrong, at least we'll have to sharpen our own ideas and make them more robust. So it's very important to stick to your guns on these things.
Exactly. Well, that pretty much brings to a close our session today, Eamon Butler. I'm so grateful that we could not only do the ambitious task of overviewing classical liberalism and its 10 principles, but also dive a little bit into some of the challenges that we face today. And I'm just wondering, one final question would be, you're the director of the Adam Smith Institute, and I know that you're coming up on the 300th anniversary of the birth of Adam Smith. How does that inform your sense of hope and action as we look to today?
Well, it's interesting that Adam Smith is still going strong after 300 years. People are still reading it and critiquing it and so on, and it's still inspiring. I think, in particular, young people. I sometimes despair of older people, but younger people, they're excited by these ideas of choice and competition and markets and
Mhm.
property and trade and lower taxes and less regulation and all this sort of thing. And they all want to be millionaires by the age of 30 and so on. This is exciting. And we need to grasp that excitement, and we need to make the creation of a free society an act of daring, if you like, something that young people can latch onto and say, yes, this is a good thing to do, and I'm going to be a part of it.
Excellent. Well said, Eamon. And thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Eamon Butler, author and commentator. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Well, that brings to a close our session with Leaders on the Frontier. On behalf of all of us, we're grateful that you could join us, and these conversations do continue. We're pleased to announce that world-renowned Dr. William Happer will be joining us on January the 12th at 3 p.m. Central Time. Dr. Happer is an award-winning physicist and authority on climate science and carbon dioxide. So be sure to join us as we talk about the state of science and climate change. And that brings today's session to a close. We're glad that you could join us today, and we're glad for all the support that we receive. Frontier does not accept any government resources, and so we're very glad that you can help make our mission possible. Be sure to check out our website and a variety of resources, including books. And also, please do join us on our media channels on YouTube, Rumble, and Getter. In the meantime, we want to wish you a Merry Christmas and the best in the new year. And be sure to join us next time. Thank you.
Thank you for watching Leaders on the Frontier. We're a nonpartisan think tank. We explore ideas, policy, and practical solutions that can make a difference in the lives of Canadians. We do not accept any government funding. We work for you. Thank you for supporting Frontier. Visit fcpp.org to give. While you're there, be sure to check out our latest articles and research. Without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, nor are you free. Comment below. We'd love for you to join the conversation.